and the media, as I've mentioned at the top of the show, are clearly on the same page, calling this a constitutional crisis, trying to sort of, build this up into something.
Thou shalt waste money. That's our way.
Well, welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined now by Richard Porter. He is a former RNC committeeman from the state of Illinois and a contributor to Real Clear Politics. And Richard, you're a lawyer for like, what, 30, 40 years?
Yeah, 40 years now. Yeah, 40 years.
So you know something about the law. So let's talk about this constitutional, I'm going to use air quotes here, constitutional crisis that we have. Do we really have a constitutional crisis? Are we headed towards a constitutional crisis?
No, I mean, not unless you think that not spending money is a constitutional crisis. I mean, that's the crazy thing about it is like there's one side that's arguing that the president has to spend money even if he believes it's inefficient. And if spending money inefficiently creates a constitutional crisis, then we probably have a crisis with our Constitution, right? I mean, it's sort of a nutty argument. This is a tug of war that Congress and the president have had for the 224 years that the Constitution has been in play, and frankly, it's not a surprise that it's coming up. This is coming from the same Democrats who impounded funds that were appropriated for building the wall. And back in 2020, they were appropriated. In 2021, Joe Biden just sort of decided it was inefficient to be spending that money. So you can take it all with a grain of salt.
So yeah, we talked about this earlier in the show, but Carl mentioned, look, there are a lot of different lawsuits that have been filed, and one of them about birthright citizenship, for example, that's in the Constitution. That's clearly an issue that's probably going to go to the Supreme Court, and I guess they've ruled on it before.
But you can be aware of that. It was ruled on with regard to the child of a legal immigrant, not an illegal immigrant. And the wording in the 14th Amendment is what matters. So you don't have a binding Supreme Court precedent on this matter with regard to illegal immigrants. And it all spins around what the meaning of the phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof means. And in the Supreme Court case that was decided back in the 1890s with regard to a legal immigrant, that really suggested that there were duties back and forth between the citizen or the legal person and the government. For example, was that person required to serve in the military and so forth? So I don't think that's really that much of an open and shut question. I mean, it's been treated as such, and mainstream media doesn't really describe the nuances that are important to the distinctions being made. But that's a case that will probably go to the Supreme Court. I agree.
And clearly the Supreme Court's going to rule on that, and I assume that whatever they rule, the Trump administration is going to follow. I can't imagine them sort of just outright ignoring the Supreme Court decision, although that's what Biden did with the student loan thing. Basically, he tried to
get around
it, circumvent it, and maybe Trump would try something like that. But back to these cases where it involves basically DOJ, right, and the firing of employees and the shutting down of different, departments and the canceling and termination of a lot of these funds.
Yeah.
To your point, that seems to me to be, and Carl said he thought as well, this is the firmest ground for the administration to stand on. I mean, Congress appropriates these funds, but the judges, and certainly, these judges that have ruled, can they really be telling the executive branch how to spend the money, or that they have to spend all of the money, or what they can do, or how they go about executing the appropriations that have been passed by Congress?
Well, I think it's important to step back and review our civics, which is we have three co-equal branches: Congress, which creates the laws, the executive, and there's a sole executive, which is the president. All executive power is vested in that single individual, who then delegates it down the chain of command. But all power rises from the president under the Constitution. And then the judiciary. And the judiciary, as a matter of custom, has become the branch that tells the other two what the law is. But other branches, the president, have to actually enforce what the law is. And so there's always a tension between the roles. The president has an independent power to determine if something is unconstitutional, for example. It's not solely vested in the courts. People can dispute that, and they'll go to the court, and the court will be seen as the final decider on that. But the president has an independent duty. If, for example, the Congress were to pass a law that violated the 14th Amendment, the president could say, look, that's a violation of the 13th Amendment, the limited, or 15th Amendment, limited, someone's right to vote on the basis of race. The president could strike that down and refuse to enforce that law. So you have these independent powers, three co-equal branches in tension with each other. And the thing to recognize about spending is it was long assumed that an appropriation was setting a ceiling on what the president could spend. It wasn't a floor. In other words, the president couldn't spend money unless the Congress appropriated it, okay? That's
Right.
the Anti-Deficiency Act, which is the president, and that's an act of, 130 years standing, which says it violates the law could be a criminal violation for the executive to spend money that was not appropriated by the Congress. But it was long thought, no one thought that it would set a floor on spending as well. That in other words, if you appropriated $1 billion to the Department of Defense, that the president had to spend the full $1 billion. Like, for example, Jefferson refused to spend money on 3 gunboats that he thought were wasteful, that was appropriated by Congress. So it's long been accepted that appropriations are authorizations, not mandates. Sometimes they can be stated in the mandatory language, you shall spend. But even then, for example, under Roosevelt, spending was, Dawes, the first budget chief, his view was if it was wasteful, if you didn't need to spend the money, then it was the job of the president, whose duty it is to faithfully execute the laws, that incorporated within the sense of being faithful was being efficient. And so, and I think that just makes sense. Again, the whole purpose of the Constitution after the Articles of Confederation was to create a strong executive who could actually implement the law effectively. A collective body, Congress, which also held the executive power under the Articles of Confederation, didn't have the ability to make things happen. So we divided that power and created a strong executive, and it's inherent in the executive's role to make decisions about efficiency, about how money should be spent.
We're speaking with Richard Porter. He is a former lawyer of 4 decades and a contributor to Real Clear Politics. So, Richard, where does this go from here? I mean, clearly, the Democrats think and the media, as I've mentioned at the top of the show, are clearly on the same page, calling this a constitutional crisis, trying to sort of, build this up into something.
Thou shalt waste money. That's our way.
Well, politically, it might be a loser. Certainly defending wasteful spending, defending the bureaucracy is a loser. Yeah. But if they're able to change the frame and the narrative well, that's not what this is about. This is about Trump is acting in an unconstitutional manner, and he's defying the courts. Suddenly, that might be more fertile political ground for them. Because I think, look, Trump's approval rating, we talked about this yesterday, is at an all-time high. His favorability ratings at an all-time high. People, independents and certainly Republicans, they like what he's doing. But he still has, I think, that residue and baggage of if people think he's acting beyond his powers, unconstitutionally, he could take a hit for that politically.
Yeah, it depends what he's doing. I mean, if he's doing the right thing, people are going to be with him on that. And I think that's the ultimate constraint. The political constraint is the ultimate constraint between the branches. There is the famous circumstance where the Supreme Court case made a decision about the rights of Indians that Andrew Jackson just said, hey, that's their opinion. I have a different opinion. They can enforce theirs if they want. And they had no ability to enforce it.
Right.
And his opinion was a popular opinion. And so he held that day, but that was always people kind of say, oh my goodness, that violates the spirit of the Constitution. But again, the court's role in terms of deciding sort of the constitutionality between the branches, it's a co-equal branch. It is not a superior branch. So they have to tread lightly on these things as well, because they don't want to make a decision that won't be enforced, right? So everybody's sort of looking at the political tea leaves on this. And frankly, I think one of the seminal articles on this was written by Mark Paoletta, who is has been nominated to be the new general counsel at OMB. I think that's the memo that J.D. Vance is drawing upon when he's talking about the limits of the courts to tell the executive what they can do. The executive is a separate and equal branch, and the courts do not have a super power to tell the executive how to implement the law. That's the executive's power, sole power under the Constitution. So this will play out in the courts. And I think the Trump administration is well within its rights to, you have a single judge appointed by a Democrat, where he's in Rhode Island or something like that, that somehow he's going to tell the duly elected president of the United States he must spend money wastefully at whatever agency they're talking about. I mean, it's not a position that's going to be sustained over the long period of time.
All right. Well, this is not the last time we will talk about this, I'm sure. And so we'll have you back when there's more to this story. Richard Porter, contributor to Real Clear Politics. Richard, always good to have you.
Great to be here, Tom.
All right. That's going to do it for us. On behalf of Carl and Andy, I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder of RCP. And you've been listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Everybody have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.